Okay, so we ended getting our smoke simulation set up and the particles baked. So if we hit play, you can just make sure everything is working correctly. You'll notice that some of the values in the particle system have been grayed out because we can't change those or update those unless we delete this bake. So next, we're going to start adding our trees. And you have rocks. I didn't model those, but doing the rocks will be the same process as doing the tree collection. So I'm not going to go over that specifically, but you'll be able to do it based on the other things that we've talked about. So to make this a little easier, let's select our terrain and let's select just the train track and then hit the slash above number 8. So those are the only two things in our scene. Now, we'll just work in solid view to make it work, update a little faster. So if we put our 3 geometry node scattering systems onto this one plane, we're going to run into the trouble of the fact that modifiers are affected by what's before it. So long story short, if you do the pine trees first, then you add the other trees second, it's going to see those pine trees as part of the mesh that the tree should be on. So you're going to have trees growing out of the side of your pine tree. And we don't want that. So we're going to make 3 more of the terrains that we're going to use for each of the geometry nodes. So just select your terrain, hit Shift D, Z, move it down, and then I can hit Shift R to repeat that. So I have 3 more versions, one for the pine trees, one for the other trees, and one for the rocks. Okay, so let's go ahead and look in our assets. And I want to look for let's start with the object scatter using weight paint. And this should be our trees. So we're going to drag that onto one of the planes. And I moved it onto this one. So I am going to go ahead and name that. So let's do this. We have our landscape is our first one. The second one is going to be our landscape pine trees. And let's go ahead and name the third one landscape, just tree collection. And the last one will be landscape dash rock. All right, so we dragged the pine trees onto this one. Let's go ahead and find our collection scatter, which should be our collection of trees. So we're going to move that onto the next plane, which make sure I have it on the right one. And for this third one, since I don't have rocks, but I think I had you set the rocks up as a collection, you would just drag this same one onto there, and I'll do that so you can see that. And we're just going to double check that all of these have the correct geometry node things attached to them. So let's switch this to the geometry node editor, which is Shift F3. So this one is our object scatter, which is going to be our pine trees. This one is our collection scatter using weight paint. And this third one is our collection scatter using weight paint 001. So I'm just going to name this one, let's do dash rocks, or might be easier if we have it at the beginning. So rocks dash scatter collection, and we'll name this one tree dash collection. Okay, so let's just go ahead and start with our pine trees. Now, from working through this in the past, it typically seems to bring the pine tree with it without us having to bring that model in separately. If you run into trouble where that doesn't come up, let me know and I can show you how to do that in class. So what we want to do is make sure the 3D cursor is in the origin of our main landscape. So select the main landscape, hit Shift S, cursor to selected, and that will move our cursor to that point. We're going to select our other terrain that has the pine trees. we're going to hit Shift S and move that selection to the cursor. So they're both at exactly the same place, which sometimes causes weird glitches. So we're going to look at our geometry nodes for just a second. And we're looking here on the right at the group output, and we're looking at the join geometry. Now, you may have forgotten, but we have two things. We have the original object, which in this case is the terrain, being combined with our scatter, which will be the pine trees. We no longer need to see the original terrain. We just need the trees to show up. So we're just going to left click and drag on this bottom connection to unplug it, plug that into the group output, and then we can delete this geometry node, join geometry node. This way the trees will be the only thing showing when we render, not causing any weird glitches. Now, to make changes to this, we are going to have to use weight paint. So we're in solid view. We're looking at object mode, and we're going to change that to weight paint. Now, one negative is that by unplugging the geometry, we cannot see the colors showing up. But the positive is if we switch to our colors, we can actually see the colors of our terrain. And we don't want trees growing on the gray areas. We may or may not want trees on the brown area, depending on what you want to do. So this allows us to see the landscape that we're painting on. If we did it the other way, where we saw the mesh, you would only be seeing the reds and the blues and the yellows of the weight paint, and you couldn't see the colors. So I feel like this is more practical for what we're doing. So with that being said, we need to do a couple more things. Make sure that you do have landscape - pine tree selected. We have to tell it the vertices we're painting to. So we're going to go down to the data tab in the properties panel. We're going to click that little green triangle, and we're going to hit a plus sign, and we're just going to keep this simple and call this pine trees. So you can type it lowercase, uppercase, but we're going to need to spell this exactly the same. So pay attention to what's uppercase, if you put a space or not, whatever. Once you have done that, we'll go to the modifier tab, and our object being scattered is still a pine tree, so that's fine. The vertex group is going to be pine trees, and made the uppercase, so that should be correct. And before we start painting, let's look at our tool. And right now it's going to be in the positive, meaning it's going to be adding. And the strength, I'm going to make this something like 0.2. So I'm starting kind of weak, and I can keep building layers over the same place to get more and more trees. So for my landscape, I'm envisioning pine trees being on the higher elevations, and then the other trees being closer to the train track. So let's say that I want a few pine trees in this area. I should be able to brush a little bit, and you can see that it's starting to make some trees. Now, before I go much farther, let's go ahead and fix this so we have the scale right and the rotation correct. So I'm just going to go down to the modifier tab. I have my settings for the pine tree scattering. And let's look at the rotation, and let's just make the minimum and maximum for X, Y, and Z all 0 to start with. And what we want is the maximum rotation for Z to be 360. That means they could be turned all the way around. We want the Y max to be something like 0.1 and the X max to be 0.1, so our trees can have the possibility of leaning just a small amount. Last, let's change the master scale to something more reasonable. So I'm looking at the train track as a reference to how big the pine trees should be at maximum. So I think 0.3 or 0.4 will work for what I want. You're obviously welcome to change this as much or as little as you want. You can adjust the scale. so that um, you can have a little bit bigger value. So some might be bigger than the default 0 to 1, but I'm going to keep mine at the default for right now. And as we work, you can increase the density if you feel like you're not quite getting enough trees for what you're painting, like that. So once I have that pretty close to what I want, I'm just going to come over and I'm just clicking and dragging. And the more I click in an area, the more it will be painted. And I'm still not quite getting as many trees as I want, so I'm going to increase the density by up to 5. So we can just put trees wherever you want trees to be at. I might even just have a few starting to come down this hill and a few in this area. So I'm not going to spend time painting all of this, but you obviously can take your time and paint, put trees everywhere you want. As the start shooting later and you see an area that needs more or less trees, you can always come back and adjust that, but put trees wherever you think would be appropriate for your scene. And once you're happy with that, we'll switch back to object mode, and then we'll come down to the next layer for the tree collection. And once again, we'll make sure the 3D cursor is in the correct location. At the origin of our terrain, select this, hit Shift S, selection to cursor, and move that up. So then we will connect or disconnect the terrain and just keep the trees. So we're unplugging that to connect it there.